Good day, everyone. I welcome you back to Global Education Zone. And in this episode, we are going to be dealing with relational models. Now, relational models is a very important topic in database because relational models are, if you remember, in the first episode of data processing for SS2, we talked about the fact that relational models are kind of like is one of the key data modeling structures or architectures that we can use to model and organize data. Now, relational at the end of this episode, you should be able to understand how data is represented, and you should be able to understand how data can be created and modified, and some other little things about database. Now, basically, a relational database management system, is also known as RDBMS. And these relational database management systems, they are the basis for SQL. Now we'll be talking in detail about SQL in this video. It's pronounced SQL rather. Now, and for other modern database systems like Microsoft SQL Server, we also have Microsoft Access, which is a very common one, which is kind of very important for businesses and other database and management systems and organizations alike. Now, there are different terms we use in relational database management system, and one of those terms is table. Now, this table is, I would say, is the key, one of the key terms that we can use to discuss about relational database because a table is, they are kind of like the entities. So the data in relational database management systems are stored in database objects called tables. Now, these database objects, they are a collection of related data entries and they consist of columns and rows. Now, you should remember that a table is the most common and simplest form of data structure in an in a relational database based management system. So basically, this on the screen right here is a table. Now, in this particular table, you can see the way the names are organized. This most of the time I like dealing with employee payroll because it's kind of it's more realistic and easy to understand. Now, we'll talk about things like this. You can see that these are the names. In the first column, we have the ID, which are the numbers, and this is typically how Microsoft Access does. This is typically how your data will look if it was prepared in Microsoft Access. The first column will be a column for the primary key, also known as the ID. Now we have the second column which you can name it. You can give it any value which you like, but every entity entry, every cell in that column must also have a corresponding data value. We also have the age, we have the address, we have the salary. Those are the four. Those are the different, and these are all the fields. These are different fields, and these fields, they are kind of like the things that let us know more about our data elements. Now, these employees, they are kind of like our records, and they are, let's call them data elements. They are kind of like the instances of entities. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by entity, you can visit the previous video in this course where I talked at length about entity, relationship, and attributes of ERD. Now, ERD is also known as entity relationship diagrams, and we talked about that in the previous episode. Now, basically, these tables, they are consisting of fields and records or rows. Now, these fields, each table is broken up into smaller entities called fields, and the field in a customers table consists of the ID. You can see that's the identity which we've talked about earlier. We also have the name, we have the age, address, and salary. Now, a field is a column in a table that is designed to maintain a specific information about each record in the table. Now, this field, I can call them placeholders. They're kind of like the sticky notes that help us to pinpoint any particular data we want to know about and a particular instance of an entity in data. Now, we also have the record or rules, and these records, they're kind of like, I'll call them, they are independent, and they're kind of like separate instances. They are those instances of the entity. Now, the entity is your table, and this table has instances, which are the records. Now, there are individual entries that exist in a table. For example, there are 7 records in the above customers table. Now, this table again, we have this 7 record. This is the first record. Then this is the second record here. This is the third record here. This is the fourth record. This is the fifth record. The sixth record, and then we have the seventh record rather. So you can see that each of these records, they are kind of like horizontal arrays. So you can follow the highlighter. These are horizontal arrays. So for the first person, you can see it has his own version of the ID, name, age, address. They're kind of like individuals. Now, those are the entries that make up the rows or the records. Now this is a single row here. We have number one as the ID, name as Steven, and we have the what's that again? Age as 32. We have the address as Lagos. Then we have the salary as 2,000. So that is basically. And then apart from that, we also have the column. Now, a column is a vertical entity in a table that contains all the information associated with a specific field. Now, a field is basically just the top cell in the column. So that's the difference I want you to understand now. So in database management system, we refer to the field as the top entity. So kind of like the one that determines everything. Like this name now, this name is a field. This first cell, then the rest from the top to the bottom, they are called the columns. So it's a column of data, and it's associated with a particular field. Now there are some constraints, and which we'll also be talking about in this video. But then let's talk about the null value. A null value in a table is a value that appears to be blank, which means it is not a valued field. So basically, a field with a null value is one that has been left blank during record creation. So these are just basically one of the things that happen when you kind of enter data into your database. So there's possibility of mistakes, and that's where null values are created. Now, let's talk about one very important part of this episode, and that is SQL. Now, SQL is the abbreviation of SQL, now of structured query language, and this structured query language is a computer language for storing, manipulating, and retrieving data stored in electronic database. So SQL is a language of database. It includes database creation, deletion, fetching rows, and modifying rows, and so on and so forth. So this SQL we're talking about here is a standard language. There are different versions of SQL, and I think it's kind of related to its programming language because it's kind of like it is a query language. A query language is a kind of language that helps us to ensure and enforce the integrity of the data in our database. Now, the SQL is a standard language for relational database system, and all relational database management systems like MySQL, Microsoft Access, Oracle, Sybase, Informix, Postgres, and SQL Server, they use SQL as standard database language. Now, there as it's typical of most programming language, SQL also has its own commands. So there are different kinds of commands. We will not be going into detail, but as long as I keep posting videos, when I find it necessary, or if in the comments you need to watch such a video, you can let me know, and I'll create such video um, on SQL. So, but we'll just be touching the surface today. Now, there are these commands. They include your create, select, insert, update, delete, and drop. Now we can classify this command into different categories. We have the data defining language, which are the kind of the kind of commands that help us to create, alter, and drop. So as I said, they are also including commands like create, alter, and drop. They also have the data manipulation language, the kind of edit and alter the data on the table. Then we also have the data control language, data query language, and so on and so forth. So but the rest are not very important like that. They are just kind of let's call them we'll call them supplements to the basics. Now let's talk about constraints next. Now a constraint is are the rules enforced on data columns on table. They are used to limit the type of data that can go into a table. Now this ensures that the accuracy and reliability of data in the table is ensured. Now basically a constraint could be column level or table level. Now, just imagine a case where you have a data in your Excel spreadsheet. I'm using Excel for example because Excel is quite related to database management systems. Now, the both you make use of rows and columns, but Excel is kind of less standardized, and though it still involves Visual Basic and so on and so forth. But let's say Excel is less standardized. Let's maintain that opinion. I don't know of your opinion. You can challenge my opinion. Now, basically, when we talk about Excel now, assuming you have a spreadsheet in Excel now, and then you want to input your data in a particular form. So when we talk about those formats of data, and you input your data as numbers, whereas you actually need them as date and time. Now, this if you enforce a constraint on that data, and that type of constraint is when you go to those to the ribbons and you choose a particular type of data which you want to use. When you choose that type of data, you have enforced a constraint. So anything you use, anytime you put numbers that resemble data, that resembles date, they will be enforced and coerced into date and time. So that's what I'm trying to say. So that is the same way it's kind of like a similar way it works here. So this is kind of like an analogy to the way constraints work here. So constraints, they are basically used to enforce basic standards on data, and once those standards are not met, your data will not be meeting the level of standard. So, and this standard, they are called normalization. So basically, there are different categories of constraints. We have the not null constraint, and it ensures that the column cannot have a null value. We have the default constraint, which provides a default value for a column. So example of those default constraints is when you set up a value for the data when there's no corresponding input. So you can just set a default output, and that will keep being will keep being showed. It will be displayed as long as there's no valid or required input. So that is basically what constraints has to do. Now we have the unique constraints. It ensures that all values in the columns are different. We have the primary key. It uniquely identifies each records and rows in the database table. We have the foreign key, check constraints, index, and so on and so forth. So this is a table, and in these tables, these are basically tables that demonstrate the concept we're trying to show here. So you can see this ID is basically, it is called the um, fields. Then this column, they are the field values that correspond. So this is a full table that shows which one can use to work on all these concepts of constraints, can enforce constraints, just like Excel formulas and so on and so forth. Now this is as far as we can go in this video. And finally, we've gotten to the exercise part. And this exercise, there are questions which you can try to attempt, and you can also talk about your opinion in this topic in this comment section of this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next episode.